Welcome to
That's
That's
High
High
Praise.
Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast.
I am your co-host, VH Zest.
I'm your other co-host, Captain Nostalgia. And we're joined by my other co-host, Worlds Collide. Mark Moore from Abyss Gazing is with us today too.
Stop.
What's up? This is the this is the official ending to Lovecraft July. I know we talked about it on our last episode, but we're talking about Color Out of Space from 2019.
Why Lovecraft July? Why was July the month?
Because
It
I
was just
was
the way
Feel
Mark
coming
very
and
Lovecraft.
because I was coming back from hiatus, and it was you have any ideas for like what we want to do episodes on? And I was like, why don't we do like a Lovecraft month? And he's like, okay, we're gonna do Lovecraft July. And that's how it happened.
All right.
And then we got Anything Goes August coming up, so it's gonna
That's
be a
fun.
good time. It's
Yeah.
gonna be a
Yeah,
good time.
half of that's questionable as to what's actually going to be covered because so much of that's up in the air.
Well, if it's anything
Ah.
goes, then somebody else should choose what you cover.
Nah.
Oh.
Well, I mean, technically, to an extent, they have like it's all the guests that we will be announcing. So make sure you follow Victims and Villains
Cool.
on all of our socials. We're on.
I haven't a recommendation, but
So.
Maybe now's not the time.
Well, we are here to talk about the greatest actor of our generation.
That's true. That's true. And maybe the generation prior. Yeah.
That's actually probably a fact right there.
Yeah.
Um,
And
all
it
right.
it all started because he had to take any role he could get to pay taxes.
It's true.
This is very true. And we've been to some dark corners on this podcast, but nothing quite as colorful as this movie. I think the roles might be reversed here. Mark, have you read the short story that this movie is based off of?
I actually have not. I kept meaning to listen to it before we did this episode, and I didn't because I forgot. There's prep for you.
I finished it this morning myself.
I read it back when this movie came out, so like I still remember a little bit of the details of the story. But Micah,
Yes.
how do you think I should open us up on a trivia fun fact real quick?
You know what? Let's do that. That would be fun. Just one.
Just one. So director Richard Stanley, his favorite movie of Nicolas Cage's is the infamous 1988 horror comedy Vampire's Kiss.
Very cool.
When he approached Cage on how he wanted him to do the role of Nathan in this movie, he said that he wanted him to use the same style of performance.
Cool. Yeah.
Which
It's amusing to me because
serviceable.
at one point in the movie he starts sounding like he's doing a very bad Donald Trump impression.
You're not wrong.
Yeah. It actually got me thinking because I noticed that there were a couple parts where I was like, wow, he is like going for it with this role. And I wondered, I started to wonder about like what came first, the dialogue, like the writing of the dialogue or the casting of Nicolas Cage, and kind of what informed what there, because it was obviously like hand in glove as far as like those scenes where he's just absolutely throwing tomatoes into a trash can that is right in front of him and punching the inside of a Volvo and stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know. I'm glad to hear that though. That's really cool that like, the director had him in mind for that.
I think probably one of the best scenes that supports this is when he gets back from the hospital with his wife and he's like trying to discipline Lavinia.
Yeah.
And he just has like so much of that energy. It's like it feels like he literally just copy and pasted the energy that he has in that scene in Vampire's Kiss where he's doing the alphabet and the therapist's office, and
Yeah.
like just the way that he enunciates words in this is just just a copy and paste from that. And I love the fact that they kept that energy going,
Yeah.
30 years later.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
It amused me because at the same time that came out, right there within a year or two, Jim Carrey had a vampire movie come out too.
It's true. Once bitten.
Yep. Once
Yep.
bitten.
And it was just as cheesy.
Yeah, it was. It was maybe worse.
You had two of the most overacting actors ever doing cheesy 80 vampire movies.
Yeah.
And it was fantastic.
Yeah, it was. It was a lot of fun. Not
I
good per se, but a lot of fun.
I would love to see the two of them cross paths in a film, but now that
Yeah,
Carrie's quote unquote retired, we'll
allegedly.
we'll see if we get that.
Yeah, I guess the closest we got was Kick-Ass, because Cage's
Yeah.
character in the first one and then Carrie's in the second.
Yeah.
Well, I saw this during the theaters, so this movie made a very short theatrical run.
Mhm.
I'm Mike. I think this is your first time seeing
It was.
this.
Yeah. Yeah, it was my first time. We watched it last night. I guess you want my first impressions.
I do.
Yeah, yeah. So
So I'm wondering, before you get started, there was
Yeah.
something. Me and my wife have watched it a few times, and she wasn't a big fan. There was a couple details, and I'm wondering if you caught them, that she had missed. That when I mentioned it last night or the other night when we watched it, she was like, everything makes sense now. So I'm curious as to your take and if you caught what I'm talking about before I say anything.
I somehow doubt it. But we'll get there. I really like the movie. Yeah, I don't know. So it was fascinating having read. So I didn't read this story. At least I didn't finish it until after I watched the movie. But I've read just enough Lovecraft to be familiar with the fact that he doesn't write dialogue just about at all. So going into a movie like this, thinking cosmic horror, thinking Lovecraft, I really tried to put as much of my expectation aside because I knew that very, 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 very few directors can do a movie that's predominantly narrative and not dialogue. So it was really, really interesting. It was really, really interesting though. But I loved I really did like it. I enjoyed it. I liked the color palette a lot. Obviously, that kind of goes without saying. There have been other color out of space adaptations, and they miss that mark drastically. This movie does a beautiful job at that. I loved a lot of the triangle imagery. That was a very subtle part of the book, and it's a very subtle part in the movie. And that was a lot of fun and interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I've been trying to think about the movie objectively and not kind of think about the book in comparison. That's been really hard. I'm not really good at that. But I definitely did like it. I thought it had been a while since I personally saw a Nicolas Cage movie where he just freaked out like that. But this was released kind of a similar time as Mandy, and it definitely reminded me of that as well. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, I don't know. There's just some light thoughts.
So before you kind of drop the "did you miss it" thing, I am curious if so. I have established throughout this month that I'm not super acquainted with Lovecraft or a lot of his works. I've read a small handful of his books and short stories, and one of the things that we talked about on the latest episode of Boots Gazing with Andrew Vasella in talking about the Void is the image of the triangles. And you bringing that up, I'm actually curious if there is an actual deeper meaning when it comes to the triangles within Lovecraft, or if there's a specific thing, because I think we concluded, Mark, that it just looked cool. But I'm actually curious if there's a deeper meaning behind that.
So in the case of this story, it's not just that it looks cool, but in the case of Lovecraft abroad, I'm not familiar with any repeating triangle motifs.
Okay. Well, what does it mean in this story?
This movie.
Yeah. So, in the book, at the end, this is not really a spoiler because it's not, the movie's different, you know. At the end of the book, there's like a well, right? And then the light, the like color, if you will, they never really call it a light, they call it a color, which is super cool. The color like basically pours out of this well and goes back into space. And it says in the book that where it goes is the like the constellation of the northern, I think it was the Northern Cross, and it mentions by name the brightest star in the Northern Cross, which is one of the axis stars of the Northern Triangle in the summer sky.
Interesting.
Yeah. But like Lovecraft doesn't even draw attention to that fact. He just draws attention to the constellation and that star. And then I looked it up out of curiosity, and it was the Northern Triangle.
Interesting.
Well, isn't that cute?
All right, Mark, I think you might be the only person here that actually picked up on some of the things that
Probably.
you're going to talk about. Because I've seen this movie twice, and like I didn't pick up on anything like deeper, like out of the ordinary. So I'm interested to hear this.
So the complaint that my wife had was that everything just seems so random. Everybody just starts going nuts for no apparent reason. So if you noticed, the meteor hits, everything lights up. Then they go out to see Chong out there in his little shed, and they're walking through some fog, and he kind of shines his light around in the fog and the mist, and you see swirls of the magenta and purple in front of him.
Mm-hmm.
So now you've got the color is now in the mist that's floating through the woods. Mm-hmm. You see him getting a glass of water from the sink, and you see little purple and magenta flecks in the water. So they were showing you that it was in the water. Right. And it's spreading as you see the magenta plants growing. It's spreading through the ground and the water. Yeah. And it's almost like infecting them. And that's why it's driving them crazy. Even closer to the end, when Nicolas Cage is pouring one of his mini glasses of bourbon, they show little flecks of
the ice,
purple and magenta in the ice.
Yep.
So they're ingesting the color and being influenced by it the more they drink, and and interact with essentially nature almost.
Yeah, like foreign nature, but yeah.
I did notice that on like this. There are certain things that like I picked up on it like this time around, because like being able to like take notes and like actually like talk about and bounce ideas back and forth off my wife as well, was like, I feel like it made me pick up on a lot of things that I missed, and I definitely missed that the first viewing, but I caught it the second. It's very subtle, but it helps the world kind of come alive once you like actually notice those little subtleties that Stanley brings.
Yeah. And it makes some of the things make a little more sense as to why some of them are going crazier faster than the others.
Yeah. I think too, like, you know, so at the very beginning, when you see like Lavinia, is that her name? The daughter? Mm-hmm. And she's like doing that ritual, and she like calls on like the 4 archangels and stuff. And she mentions like someone having cancer. They never really go back to it, but I think it's implied that the mom has cancer.
It's not implied.
It's not.
Really? I don't swear they never mention it after that.
So
she makes the comment that it's been they're on the porch and Nicolas Cage is hitting on her, and she's like, it's been 6 months since the surgery. How can you still find me attractive after all that?
Okay.
So she's pretty much downright saying she had a mastectomy.
Okay. I heard. Okay, cool. So like, I think I've kind of wondered from that point if there was a sort of susceptibility that they were kind of trying to imply, that like, because she was ill, that she was more susceptible to madness, I guess, in Lovecraftian terms. Because you see her really go off the edge. I don't want to say first because like the little kid was really influenced early on, but you see her like really swan dive off the edge before anybody else.
I I would disagree. I think in terms of like being like aggressively like angry, yes,
Mhm.
but the youngest son is definitely the one that's like influenced first
Yeah,
because like you see him and he's like, oh, he's like looking at the well, he's like he could
He's
hear this like very slight whistle.
yeah,
so he's kind of interacting with it first.
Yeah,
Nicolas
that's a better
Cage
way to
is
put it.
being influenced by it first.
Hmm. How do you
It
figure?
is, yeah, I was gonna
Because
say because like
the first thing he starts doing after interacting with the meteor is starting to drink. So first thing he's doing, throwing ice in a glass, which we've
Water.
already established
Yeah,
had the contaminated water in it, with bourbon and drinking it. And the first one really starting to show signs of being influenced. It's not till a little bit later that the mother starts kind of going off the deep end and getting snappy.
mm.
Lavinia never really showed any signs until closer to the end. She does her little weirdo thing
Yeah,
later on in the movie as an attempt to protect herself, so to speak.
yeah,
And
yeah,
the brother has been hanging out with Chong in the shed,
yeah,
so he's been getting his doses in.
yeah,
The only one that really hadn't was Lavinia,
yeah, yeah. It's
but
very true.
Jack was interacting with, not being manipulated by.
yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, also like kids are like, especially at that age, are like really susceptible to like at least like say what you will, like if there is like outside forces, whether it would be like demons or angels, like I don't know, I think that kids would be like the first to kind of see stuff like that, and so it
yeah,
kind of makes sense that like you would have Jack kind of be the first person to really get to see that and like and or hear the siren song, so to say, of the aliens,
yeah.
or of the color as it's called here.
Of the color. Yeah. Um. Yeah. Word alien is never used in the movie or in the book. It's interesting.
It's
Um.
Well, that sounds like Lovecraft.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Truly.
So
but and like even like when Wade and that's his yeah, Wade Ward, sorry, Ward,
Ward.
and when the
Mhm.
sheriff, when they go down to Ezra's shack, they have like the recording, and he says something to like the extent of like it's the color, it's gonna kill us all. It's like very ominous, but
Yeah.
like it is like this like all invading like color that one of the things I'm really glad that I do remember about the Lovecraft story and how describes the color is that it was not a shade of anything that was like known to man.
Correct. Yep.
And like Cage even like acknowledges that at one point here. And I think it's also really worth noting that I think this story has been around for quite a long time. And yes, Mikey brought up earlier about
96
how
years.
96 years, and you
Yeah.
brought up earlier about like how there have been a few different film adaptations of this,
yeah.
and I
5.
five. I don't think you are. I think this is probably the most successful one when it comes to representing the story visually.
Yeah.
Well, the others were like indie releases and super low
Not all of
budget.
them.
Not all of them.
No, the first one stars Bela Lugosi, so that's not an indie movie at all.
Oh,
It came out in 1965, and it is okay. I don't hate it. They just took a ton of liberties, but it was actually. I don't want to like really dwell on the other movies because it's not what we're talking about, but I wanted to watch them because I knew that this one was the most recent, and I wanted to see if those influenced it at all. And they did, at least in gentle ways, and that was really cool to see. The second one came out in 1987 and stars Will Wheaton and his little sister. It's called The Curse. Um, Yep.
I did know
So the
that.
first one's called Die Monster Die in '65 with Bela Lugosi, and then the second one is The Curse with Will Wheaton. And that one, I'm glad you brought up the water, Mark. That one is all about the water. Like they push that narrative to the forefront, real strong and really good. I personally think from an adaptation standpoint, like if you're talking about adapting a story into a movie, I think that one is the best. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, and I won't go into it, but they just do a really solid, interesting job adapting the story. This one has some uncanny accuracies to it that are a lot of fun. Like Ward's character, he comes to survey this area in New England, which is where it is, where pretty much all of Lovecraft's stuff happens is in New England. And they mention Arkham. They mention like, oh, are you from Providence? Are you from this place? It's like all New England places.
Oh,
Um,
he's wearing a Miskatonic University
that's
t-shirt.
true. Yeah. And Miskatonic is brought up multiple times in Lovecraft stuff. And he's there to survey the area for the purpose of building a reservoir, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was like the main character. The narrator of the store is Ward's character in the movie. Narrator of the story. Yeah, so and that's really, really cool. That was a really strong aspect of this adaptation that I think is really, really good. Also, too, just um, if we can just talk about the way this movie begins and ends, so strong, like visually and narratively. They took verbatim lines from the book as they're showing you like this, like kind of almost dead, weird looking forest and things like that. Like really beautiful. That's something that my wife and I like loved the most about watching this movie is just it is gorgeous. Like it's so good looking.
Before you jump into there, I have a fun trivia fact for you. So we obviously already know that the narrator's name in this movie is Howard Phillips. However, Lovecraft's actual full name is Howard Phillips Lovecraft,
Right.
which apparently he went by Ward Phillips. One Lovecraft story from 1927 is entitled The Case of Charles Dexter Ward and features a character named Ezra.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that they did stuff like that with this movie where like um it kind of acknowledged that like Lovecraft really did build kind of a universe. And so they have like those really strong nods to just his writing and creativity as it is. Like super cool.
One of the other things you talked about the recording in Chong's shack when they went out there when the shit was hitting the fan or starting to. The recording actually explains what's going on. It came to Earth in the rocks in the meteor and starts converting it into what it knows. So he starts describing that the color coming on the meteor is converting everything around it to what it knows and the world it came from.
Yeah, it's
And
terraforming.
yeah,
Yeah.
essentially, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I loved that. I don't remember that being a strong point in the book, but I love that in the movie because that just made sense. Some of the other movie adaptations have made it really like evil and sinister, and the book doesn't really convey it that way at all. It's horrifying, but not evil. And I
Well,
love that like this leans into that.
it reminds me of, and a lot of people didn't like it, but that first Final Fantasy movie they did,
Spirits within,
yeah, Spirits Within.
totally.
It's the same concept.
Yeah,
The meteor crashed into Earth, and all the ghosts of these like monsters are just like killing everything, but they're not doing it because they're there to destroy life.
Mm-mm.
They're doing it because they think they're animals and they don't know that they're ghosts. And
Yeah,
everything they pass through, they're just killing as they pass through it.
yeah,
Well,
So it's the same kind of idea. The
right,
meteor at the Earth and doing what it knows to do,
yeah,
not coming to Earth and trying to destroy everything around it.
right.
what I think is fascinating about this adaptation is, and I'm gonna read Ezra's monologue here in a second, is talking specifically about the subject of the monster being the color. color is like neutral. And so I really like think that the Stanley and a lot of the story is really able to convey that neutrality really well by kind of showcasing how like in the beginning everyone is affected differently by the color, but
Yep.
ultimately ends up becoming like effectively the same. So the recording says nothing, 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 nothing. Cold and wet, but it burns, sucking the life out of everything. Came down in the rock and lives in the well. It grew down there, poisoning everything, changing everything into something like the world it came from, into what it knows. We all we all know it's coming, but we can't get away. It's got everything that lives. They all drunk the water, it got strong, fed itself on them. It came from the stars where things ain't like they are here. It's just color, but it burns. It sucks and it burns. It burns. I
Yeah,
think to
a lot of those, not that whole thing, but a lot of those, like it sucks and it burns and it's cold and it's wet and all those things are like verbatim from the book. Yeah.
Yeah. And
I
that's
think
pretty,
like go ahead,
yeah.
Mark.
Oh, no, you're fine.
I was gonna say like I think that like really kind of showcases like really how like terrifying this concept is. Like this movie looks beautiful, but also at the same time, I mean, like imagine if something like this happened
Sure.
and you couldn't like Nicolas Cage like makes it a point like, we like there's like so many points in this movie where like Ezra says like, the water comes from the earth's tit. There is like everything, we harvest everything. Like there's a scene of like Nicolas Cage going out and like picking like tomatoes and peaches and um everything along like those lines and like fresh fruit. So you're seeing that this is a family that is like outside of like the internet and like television, like modern electricity, like
Kind of.
yeah, they like really live off of the land. So like this concept of basically everything being stripped away, their very like resources actually changing them is like absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
So the way it's made out, if you listen to like Lavinia and his wife, it almost sounds more like he forced them out there for a
Yeah.
change in
Hmm.
life
Yeah.
than they're just out there hanging out, living off the grid.
Yeah.
Um, but are we just gonna ignore the fact that the cat's name was G Spot? We're gonna go this entire store
Look,
show
look,
without ta- without talking about G Spot the cat.
here is another fun fact for you. That
Poor
that
cat.
cat's actual name is Lucifer.
Wow.
Uh is what he is listed as, or
Wow.
she is listed on IMDb.
That's so funny. That's so great. I'm really glad you brought up like the fruit and stuff and the idea of them living on the land. The idea that like so in the book, the fruit does grow really well, but it starts growing wrong, like in incorrect times of year and things like that. Um, and and it tastes terrible. So like it's really accurate. All of the movies that I've watched so far, all the adaptations speak to that. There's always like beautiful, huge tomatoes, and they're terrible. Like they're awful. Um,
Well, they're contaminated from the
yeah,
water in the ground of
Yeah.
the
yeah,
color.
yeah. So
Yeah,
that
it was funny talking about that. Sorry, don't mean to cut you off. I have
no, you're good.
horrible ADD, and we keep talking about the color. I'm pretty sure my neighbors thought I was having a disco or a party or something because I'm watching this movie and like I've sent Josh videos. I've put in like active backlights. So like every time it's flashing like purple and magenta and stuff, my whole living room's lighting up and the whole neighborhood can see it. Oh, it was awesome. It
That's
was so
amazing.
fantastic.
That's so cool. Gosh, where do you live?
I'm over I'm just south of Memphis.
Just out. Oh, so you're like in the corner. You're like Okay.
I'm just over the border
Okay.
in
Cool.
Mississippi, literally over just on the other side of the border.
Okay. Dang. Cool.
So
Word.
yeah.
That's awesome. That's so
Yeah.
cool. But
Mark,
yeah,
you
I
brought
love.
it. Go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
Nope. Go.
Okay, fine. Yeah, I loved how much they did with the animals. The whole alpaca thing, I felt like that was just kind of like them having fun with it. And the whole, I think it really, to some extent, I think it was them having fun. To some extent, what you just said, I think was really poignant that like Nathan's character kind of forced them out there. And I think that's kind of like the alpacas were just another kind of device to help you realize that like this guy thinks he's right all the time. This guy like wants to be over stuff. And so like he has decided or he has gotten some sort of information that alpacas are the animal of the future, and he has just steered his family this direction for whatever reason at all. Probably because they keep hinting like he doesn't want to be like his father, which is a reference to the first adaptation, Die Monster Die. So yeah, I don't know. I thought that was really fun, kind of weird, and kind of like, oh shoot, this guy's like actually probably kind of manipulative.
Now, did they say when they actually moved out there? Because
I
the way I took it, I didn't catch it if they did, but the way I took it, it almost seemed like it was his reaction to her recovering from cancer and surgery.
I think that's probably a safe assumption.
Yeah,
Because it feels like a lot of the I think you're both right. I think like you brought up the fact that like he forced him out there and the alpacas just kind of seem like a extension of that
mm,
because there's a few scenes that speak to that where they leave and Benny and Lavinia are in charge of like feeding them. And like I do think that like it's this extra layer of like funny. Like I wrote down like I don't remember alpacas having such a big deal in this like narrative, but like they kind of make it a big deal. Like they kind of
yeah,
go out of their way at some points to make it a big deal.
And
But
yeah.
we witness a
eh,
mild alpacalypse.
yeah, dude, such a good scene.
A Llamageddon, if you will.
Llamageddon, yes. Go check out our episode on. Go check out the episode of Llamageddon on Bisgazing.
Oh, that's such an
Uh,
awesome movie.
what what it I think what it really boils down to, Micah, is that like Nathan is a like just a typical like narcissist, and so you're kind of getting to
Yeah,
see like the impact of that to where like
yeah,
you know, his wife like buries herself in work. You
yeah,
have Benny constantly stoned and hanging out with the dog. You have
yeah,
Lavinia that has kind of turned to Wiccan, and
yeah,
like literally her entire arc up until the moment that she has changed is I want to get out of here. I want to be
yeah,
free from this place. I don't want
yeah,
anything to do with this. And I think that this film speaks volumes to the amount of damage that a narcissistic personality can do to one's mental health, and even
yeah,
from that perspective like how it can essentially tear families apart
yeah,
um as well.
But
yeah,
I don't necessarily think he was being narcissistic. I think what he was doing was he thought what he was doing was in the best interest of his family to take care of and protect them.
yeah,
You're not wrong, but I at least
It,
for me, and like I know for like me and like my wife, like decisions like moving and stuff like that are have to be a
it's a group decision.
unilateral
Yeah,
decision.
yeah,
typically, yeah, it should be.
yeah.
But a narcissist typically wouldn't be making a decision based on the well being of others.
That is a valid point.
That's fair. That's fair. I think that maybe he like thought in his mind he was doing the right thing, but like also at the same time, like you can see just the interaction, like
Yeah,
there is I think it Micah is right. Like you read this guy like he kind of believes like what he's doing is right, but like also that he's never wrong.
Yeah.
And like he seems like he might not be an outright narcissist, but he definitely has a lot of like those tendencies that might make him like a little bit selfish, even if he thinks that he is quote unquote doing what is best for everyone
Yeah.
involved.
I do think there is more of a like, and I mentioned this briefly, but like when they're talking on the porch, they're talking about like his dad and, how he does not want to be like his dad, is not like his dad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And there's like animosity there. And I think that's probably a lot of kind of what you see built into the character is just like, whether it is narcissism or whether it's just like, it's just rebellion, and it's just like him just wanting so much to just be anti everything his dad was or his parents were, to a fault, to a fault of like trying so hard to change everything so that it's different when actually like his dad was probably really controlling and manipulative kind of in the same way, just for his own means. That's kind of conjecture. But anyway.
So my question, you start seeing him scratching his arm and it turning into something weird.
Yeah.
What was that? Because I know in a
I
lot
don't
of
know.
Lovecraft stories, the people close to like the influence of the elder gods and old ones and stuff start turning into the deep ones.
Yeah. And that's valid. That may have been just their way of referencing that concept. But I noticed that too, because no other character really had that like he did.
But
And
we also
he was also drinking nonstop
yeah.
the
we
whole time.
Yeah.
we
He's also
also
the only one who hallucinates too. And
Yeah.
that is
that's
accurate to the book.
and he is also the only one we actually see bathe in the water.
Whoa.
So because he actually had like that full body exposure, that
Topical.
could explains some of the
And
reasons as to why
he picked up that weird jellyfish looking thing that like
Yep.
grabbed onto his hand.
That was so cool. I like freaked out at that point. I was like, whoa, that's effective. That was so good. That was so strong.
That also kind of scared Erica, so
Yeah, I love this. I've loved these adaptations of this story, especially this one, because like there is sort of a, you said this earlier, Mark, where like your wife felt like a lot of what was happening was kind of random. And it's not random, but I do think it can be kind of chaotic. And I do think that like the story has a vagueness about it, like a decent amount of Lovecraft does. A lot of the story is just like chock full of adjectives, not actual descriptions of what you're seeing or supposed to see or what's going on.
Well, he leaves everything so vague in his work.
Yeah.
And then, oh, it's coming up the stairs. I see it. I'm losing my mind, kind of thing.
Right. Right. And
So
that's
it's supposed
all.
to be so out of this world
Yeah.
and insane that it drives you insane.
Right. Yeah.
So,
And I love that, but I love like just how open-ended that has been, because like you get room for interpretation. And there's almost this sense of like, almost is the key word. Almost this sense of like there's no wrong answer. Like there are key themes, there are things that the book talks about, the animals in particular, the bugs in particular, the fruit and vegetables. Those things are really, really static in the story and in a decent amount of like the adaptations. But like what is actually going on, what is actually driving people over the edge, aside from just the water, again, that's a static aspect. There's a lot of room for play. Two of the movies have done like you go into like the barn or whatever. One movie is a greenhouse. And there's just like a massive mess of congealed animals. And like that's a blast. And it's crazy and gross. And again, like there's almost just no wrong answers to whatever the madness could be. And I thought that was just That's a lot of fun, and it makes stories like this really adaptable in a way that you don't have to be strict about, because there wasn't a strictness to them. It's a short story.
Well, I
There's a
know the
lot of
plan. I know the plan overall is that
Hmm.
the was it the director that also kind of adapted it is working on doing the Dunwich Horror next
Really?
as
ah
part of the trilogy.
back up. So, all right, it's time for some trivia. So,
My favorite
let
part of the
me
podcast.
actually. All right.
Did I ruin
Where
some of your trivia?
you did not. You did not. So, in a Q&A with Richard Stanley, the film's director, he claimed that the film would be the first of a trilogy, with Dunwich Horror adaptation coming next. Go check out the Dunwich Horror episode from Abyss Gazing. Nevertheless, in March 2021, the trilogy was canceled after Stanley was accused of domestic abuse by his former partner, Scarlett Armorous, and production company Spectre Vision cut all relation with him, which is the production company that produced this. However, there's another twist. On August 16th, 2022, Stanley stated that he still intends to go forward making a modern remake of the Dunwich Horror, having prepared a script for it. And he stated all of this on the podcast. Here's the thing with Alec Baldwin. He also asked Baldwin to read the script for the role of Dr. Armitage, which Baldwin expressed interest in. So as of right now, it has no home and a potential star attached to it. So it is not a definitive thing as we thought.
It feels chaotic.
So it's fitting.
Yeah.
Well, so you have to also
Touche.
consider that this movie came out in 2019. This was the first film that he had made as a feature film since 1996 when he was fired off the island of Dr. Moreau. So this was kind of his big comeback.
And that
Interesting.
wasn't
And
a good movie.
it was not. And he was
Because he was
fired.
fired.
He was there's a lot wrong with that. So he was fired like 2 weeks into the shoot or something crazy like that. Like it was not
Jeez.
very it was not very the story behind that is crazy, and like his relationship to it. It was the last on-screen performance from Marlon Brando. It is one of the weirdest movies, but the history behind it is fascinating. So,
Weird.
I mean, this movie came out in like I said, 2019. Who knows when we will see a Dunwich Horror?
Yeah.
I would love for him to do it. I thought he did a great job here, but also at the same time, like I, I don't know if we got like a trilogy, another director picked up this trilogy. Who else would you want to like direct something like
Eggers, Robert Eggers,
Del Toro.
or Del Toro.
I would love to see Del Toro do it. I would actually really like to see potentially the directors of the Void. I think that they would do a
It's on my watch list.
great job to kind of carry on uh an extension of that.
It would probably end up getting picked up by Blumhouse, and one of their people would do it, just turn it into another Conjuring or Halloween or something.
So here's the
I
thing
like
with
James
that.
Wan, but like I don't have that much faith in him. Not for Lovecraft.
His
So
style fits what he does,
Right.
and what he does is not the weird stuff.
Right.
no.
It's the spooky.
Yeah. He
So
does typical horror.
so what I think the reason that I say that is because one of those directors went on to go do Psycho Gorman. And
Incredible film.
yeah. And so like I genuinely think that he would do an awesome job with
Yeah.
at least him would just run gangbusters around something like that.
Yeah. I still think Robert Eggers, but I did think about Del Toro. But the problem is Del Toro is known for like all of his movies getting canned for for no reason.
Yeah,
He's not
the
wrong.
all the studios are scared of his movies because they're not a typical Hollywood fit into our puzzle, lack of puzzle, so to speak.
Yeah.
It's not the typical Hollywood movies that he tries to put out.
Yeah.
And they all throw a fit. It's like, we want another cookie cutter movie that we know
Yeah.
is going to make money, not you risking money.
Yeah.
It's kind of like with Pacific Rim. They threw a fit when Pacific Rim came out and was like, it hasn't made any money. And he kind of laughed and was like, wait till it hits Japan. And it made its budget in Japan like opening weekend.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they tried to do a sequel, Pacific Rim 2, and they took everything from him and gave it to somebody else.
It's terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm going to say this because I'm notorious. I brought it up earlier when we were talking. I'm notoriously not a fan of this director, but I'm going to preface the majority of Lovecraft's work is narrative. It's not dialogue. And there are directors out there who are really, really good at making movies that are effective, that don't rely on dialogue. They rely on cinematography and atmosphere. And I think Christopher Nolan deserves a shot. Nothing big, something small.
Do not
he
like
could
that.
do.
He could.
Nothing big.
He could do something.
I don't trust him that much.
Epic.
Yeah.
Speaking of epic and bringing it back to the movie at hand, here's another trivia fact for you. Micah, you brought up earlier about like how like Stanley, like they draw from like other drew from like other Lovecraft. So in the weather report playing on the television while Lavinia is washing dishes, they mention Arkham along with Innsmouth, Dunwich, and Kingsport. These are all settings that are part of different H.P. Lovecraft stories. In addition, Lavinia questions Benny about a former girlfriend from Halsbury, another location that belongs to Lovecraft's universe.
That's sick. Yeah. That makes sense. That's so good. Yeah. I mean, they mention Arkham otherwise because Arkham actually is referenced in the story, the original. But yeah, that's super, super freaking cool. There were things. Okay, I'm going to ask this because you asked a pivotal question, about the directors. Things we didn't like, things you weren't crazy about.
I think they could have done a better job of showing that it was the influence of the stuff being in nature. And they could have, as opposed to it being as subtle as it was and people missing it.
I agree. They took it for granted a little too much.
I disagree. I think it thrives on subtleness for one, but also for two, it's a movie that subtlety. Yeah, it's a movie that you have to pay attention to, and I think that I would have loved a little bit more for it to kind of, maybe not be as subtle as it was, but maybe not be too on the nose. But I think its ambiguity is really what helps this film in terms of being one of the best Lovecraft adaptations. I think that this movie would be the best movie we've covered in terms of Lovecraft July. I know some people.
It is one of the best Lovecraft adaptations to film, but I have heard some good things about Dagon, and I haven't had a chance to see it yet.
Some people are gonna fight me on that
because there's nothing to that story. They did that.
Yeah. Early 2000.
Huh.
They did Dagon.
Fascinating.
Yeah, we kicked this month off with Reanimator, the series, and that's like the most beloved Lovecraft.
How much hate have you gotten for saying you weren't a fan of that movie?
I will neither confirm nor deny. I did not confirm nor deny that I hated that movie. I just said I didn't understand the hype. But I think this one in particular, I think it's probably the strongest. And there's actually, for like the first time like all month and for like the first time in a long time with this Nicolas Cage podcast, like I actually don't have a lot of things that I didn't like about this movie.
Just nothing? You got nothing?
there's not really a whole lot. I think the tone is a little bit messy at times, where
I
you
think so too.
have kind of like Cage being this very eccentric, kind of channeling that vampire's kiss energy doesn't
Yeah,
always work with this. But I
yeah,
mean, for the most part, this movie looks stunning. It is
yeah.
paced really well. Uh, for the most part, like all of the performances are really good. Some of the
Mhm.
writing I definitely could have done without, like the scene where like she comes down, he's doing the dishes, and he's like, "I'm hemorrhaging clients. Go fix
The
uh
satellite.
The
the
dish.
satellite, the dish," and like
Yeah,
she just like all she could talk about is I just want to be on the net. And it's like it sounds like such a
yeah,
line that would be written from like 2001.
yeah. I think that was supposed to be some kind of a reference to the 1987 adaptation, The Curse, because there's points in that movie where like phones just don't work for no reason, not explained. It just happens. It doesn't make any sense because that's not related to water at all, but it just is kind of there.
But
But yeah,
from what I could tell, they never explain what he does for income. He
no, they
just
never do.
spends money.
They don't really explain what she does. You kind of have to assume.
Yeah, it's
Does
either
anybody want to take a guess?
advertising or marketing or something along that lines.
Yeah, yeah, it's got to be.
Also,
Yeah,
So
like,
there, from what I could tell, it seems like they were living off her money.
yeah,
And yeah, I'd be pretty pissed off if the whole house was living off of my income and everybody's not really concerned that I can't do my job.
yeah.
And I'm
It's
more worried about the tomatoes outside and the alpacas than
yeah.
making shit
don't
work.
you talk bad about those alpacas. They're the heart and soul of this movie.
Um, a couple things that I really didn't love, like I think you're right about the tone can be kind of uneven. I think there are parts that are just beautifully ethereal, and then parts that are just, well, to use what you just said, complaining about satellite dishes, and it just doesn't like, it's just not always like there. It doesn't feel like it's on the same level. Um, I think like I loved all the kind of dips in and out of other Lovecraft stories and references. I think like, you know, for that purpose alone, it was kind of cool to see a book called the Necronomicon. But I really didn't understand why there was any sort of like Levina's like all into like Wicca and stuff. Like that seemed honestly, that was a pretty big part of like definitely her character, if not the movie, and it's always felt out of left field to me. At least after the first scene, it did, because this story in particular is not religious at all, and some of Lovecraft stuff is more on like the culty religious side. This story's not at all, and that just felt like it kind of just didn't really belong. And then I guess the biggest thing is like, um, there are parts of this movie that really reminded me of The Witch. But I think part of the glory of The Witch is that it is such an insanely thorough and successful period piece. And this story was written 96 years ago about something that quote unquote happened in the late 1800s. And I think it would have been like, this isn't like really that big of a bone to pick. This is just me musing, but like I don't understand why we didn't get a period piece. I think a period piece would have been really freaking cool.
So funny thing, that copy of the Necronomicon, I actually own a copy of that exact print of it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so funny.
We haven't unpacked the library yet, but it's in the library. And I think we may actually have two copies of that exact print.
That's so funny.
That is
So
really
I
awesome.
laugh. I laugh every time when I watch it and I see it. It's like I own that. It's on the shelf. Not that I own the Necronomicon, but it is that print with that
Right.
cover and everything. Yeah.
There's a dog.
There's
There's a
always a
dog.
dog in here.
Yeah. I
Muttley just makes random appearances.
Yeah, I also really think like in terms of like as far as like Nicolas Cage's character goes, like this movie almost to an extent feels like the idea of Richard Stanley essentially wanted to make a Nicolas Cage movie, but also wanted to do a Lovecraft,
That
and kind of found a way to like work it in. And it's with that it's a little bit messy, I feel like. That's
no,
kind of
yeah,
where it everyone else is kind of like at like an 8 and he's at like an 11.
yeah, dude. No, that's a strong point. Like, I love Nicolas Cage. I enjoyed his performance in this movie. However, I will say this, hopefully just this one time. This is one of those movies that makes me understand why people don't always love Nicolas Cage, because it felt like he got put in this movie so that he could do what
Nicholas
he
Cage.
did and what he's
Yeah.
known for. And that was pretty much the only reason. And I think that's rough.
Yeah, the scene where he's like trying to like start the car and the car won't start,
Yeah.
and he's just like slamming his like knuckles on the and just like, yelling out the word cocksucker. Like I was like, this just seems like they were
Yeah.
just like just improvise, just do what Nicolas Cage does.
Right.
And
Well, anything you cast Nicolas Cage in, you're not casting him for a role, you're casting a role for him.
that is
I don't know. I don't strictly agree
yes
with
and
that, but I
no,
see your point.
no. Yeah, I can
There
definitely
are
see your point.
there's very few roles that he's not playing Nicolas Cage.
Mm.
You're
Mark,
talking
this is
to
the wrong crowd, man.
yeah. Mark, I will say this. I think that
didn't say it was bad. People love Keanu Reeves for it.
He's bad. Keanu Reeves is terrible.
there there are like I always tell people that like my view on Nicolas Cage is I genuinely love him as an actor, but I know that he is capable of bad performances. It is
Totally.
really how you handle and how you direct him. I think when we did Between Worlds last year, that's a great example. It's such a weird movie
Yeah.
and he's not great in that movie, and I think a lot of that comes down to the direction that you give Nicolas Cage.
So where
And
does like a Family Man fall into that?
we've not covered a Family Man yet. We'll save it. Maybe we'll invite you back for a Family Man.
I mean, it's basically, what is it, A Wonderful Life?
It's a Wonderful Life, yeah.
That's the most overrated movie of all time. So, I mean,
What, It's a Wonderful Life?
yes,
Uh,
of all time. I said it.
it's
No.
one of them.
It's
gotta be.
it's between that and Fight Club.
There are
Hey.
people that'll fight you on that one.
They can
We
fight
don't
me.
talk about we don't talk about Fight Club. Not here. Yeah. So I think, is there anything else that we want to talk about with this movie? I have one more trivia fact for you
I was
guys.
gonna say I need some trivia. Yeah,
So
I don't think I have anything else.
this is the very last trivia that IMDb has, and it says the color.
Got
Huh?
one for you.
All right, go for it.
So we mentioned the pyramids and triangles earlier.
Mhm.
Has it part of his expenses that got him into trouble with taxes in the first place was his mausoleum that he
Yeah.
built that is a pyramid?
Yeah, in New Orleans. Yep.
Yep.
You're welcome.
He also bought a haunted house down there too.
So the color used in this movie to represent the quote unquote color is magenta, which
magenta.
doesn't exist as a single wavelength or of light as a part of the spectrum of visual light. So red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet is also known as Roy
G.
Biv.
Biv. Roy G. Biv.
Yep.
To join the 7 initials. Rather, it is an extra spectral color that is only perceived by humans in a specific interaction of the optical rods in the eyes that direct red and blue in specific circumstances to create the magenta in the mind. And since red and blue are associated to good, evil, and good, it means the color is apart from evil and good to come from another universe, which these concepts cannot be applied. The color code for magenta is RGB, or red, green, blue, 255 100 100 HSB. Hue, saturation, and brightness 250, 0, 255. The election of magenta to represent the color is a hint at the previous color out of space from 2010, a black and white movie where at the 1 hour mark, the color appears as little magenta bubbles, and around the hour 11 mark as uncountable magenta bubbles fusing to form the quote unquote color.
That was technical.
Thank you for that, Josh. That was something.
Magenta is
Yeah.
also one of the basic colors in copiers and additive printing.
Mark would know
Magenta
that.
is also the name of one of the main characters in Sky High.
And Rocky Horror Picture Show.
That too. All right, gentlemen. Well, I think it comes down to this final question. Mark, since you are our guest, is Color Out of Space worthy of high praise?
I enjoy it. It's crazy. It's crazy. It's nuts. And it's fun. It's one of those roles that fits Nicolas Cage.
Even if the movie doesn't always. And Micah, same question.
Yeah. I think this movie is definitely worthy of high praise. I think that I don't fault Cage. I fault the writing. I don't know why they wanted what they wanted, but I like that they got Cage to do it.
Yeah. It's unanimous. This movie is 100% worthy of high praise. It looks gorgeous. It's paced really well. Like I said, I don't really have anything to really complain about this. And like Mark said, this movie is a lot of fun, even if it's a little messy at times.
I mean, if you want something completely batshit, it's Color Out of Space.
Yeah.
It's an insane movie and a journey into madness.
Yeah.
That only Lovecraft could do.
It's true.
Or you watch Mandy. If you have to get too craziness, it's
Mandy
either
is
Mandy.
better.
Yeah.
Mandy
is better.
And Mandy is a journey into madness on acid.
Yes. However, I
Color
will
Out
say
of Space is a journey into madness on Lovecraft.
I will say
right.
thematically, this is a lot lighter in tone.
Mm-hmm.
Mandy's a little bit harder to watch because it can be a heavy movie at times, but you hit that hour mark and it's just all right,
it's just
here
fun.
we go. Yeah, it's just fun.
Yep.
But I think that's going to do it for us on this episode, and this concludes Lovecraft July for real this time. But Mark, as the guest, where can we find you online?
I do miniature painting and junk and 3D
Do you really?
printing. Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
Can I commission something?
There's a waiting list.
There is a waiting list. Yeah. What are you trying to get painted? Jeez.
I don't know. I'll think of. You do 3D printing?
I do
Kind of.
I'm waiting on parts from Sobel right now.
Okay.
One of my boards blew up, but I do. I've been learning FDM printing, 3D printing.
Cool.
Clipper and all kinds of super technical stuff that goes with it. And that's kind of been what I've been posting about because I've been able to. I haven't been able to do much painting since I moved, but I do Warhammer and Infinity and stuff like that.
Cool.
Miniature painting.
Sick.
And it's titanium juggernaut painting on Instagram.
Sick.
And you guys can catch Mark and I on Abyss Gazing every Wednesday, wherever you guys get your podcast
Every
from.
Wednesday? You have a
Every
weekly
Wednesday.
podcast?
Yes, we do. What's up?
You left out in the cold. Hey,
anyways, we could talk about changing that afterwards. But we'll be back-to-back releases because we'll be back hopefully within the next week to talk about Sympathy of the Devil, which is the brand new Nicolas Cage movie. But Michael, where can people find you?
Yeah, you can find me right now. You can just find me on Letterboxd. I am VH Zest on Letterboxd. Yeah, please tell me my top 4 are stupid.
And on that note, you guys can also follow me on Letterboxd. It's at Captain Nostalgia. You guys can follow also I'm on, like I said, Abyss Gazing. You guys can also find us wherever you guys get your podcast from. Simply search That's High Praise. And you guys could also check out our parent company, Victims and Villains. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, and wherever you guys get your podcast from. So until next time, remember to keep on Cajun.